Welcome to Laguna Podcast, an attempt at illustrating the lives and stories from the Texas outdoors. Today I sit down with a man whose early passion for the outdoors allowed a unique career within the early Air and Marine Unit for the Border Patrol. This is my conversation with Marco Rodriguez.
Cool. We're good.
Alrighty, you ready to do it?
100%.
Cool.
Let's go. That's right.
All right. I have Mr. Marco Rodriguez in the chair today, and this is going to be a fun one, mostly because Brian had been asking me to do this for a while, and I'm glad he convinced you to get it done as well. And we're going to take a little bit of a different approach to this episode, which is also kind of exciting. With that being said, just a brief, quick introduction on like who you are, obviously what you can say. And then we're going to start with the regular questions. And as well, we have other stuff that we can go and use off as topics.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Pleasure to have you here. Hopefully you enjoyed some dinner.
It was great.
We can sit in here with a little bit of bourbon, but my name is Marco Rodriguez and currently living in the Houston area. Got a wife, 2 kids. I have a daughter who's 27, a son who's 19, and involved in federal law enforcement. I've been with the feds for almost 20 years now, and we can probably dwell into that a little bit. And there's a lot of other things that kind of, I think, have connected us, specifically with Brian and my connection to the outdoors, my connection, more importantly, to fly fishing, and having a chance to meet Brian, which is, I think, what eventually crossed our paths.
Oh, absolutely.
For us to be here and being able to do this today.
I had your name on the list since like the very inception of the podcast days. Like on the 4th episode after Eric Glass, Brian had reached out to me, and it was funny. It was one of the first names, and it was like, give me your name, give me your number. He goes, I don't know if he's going to do it. I think there's things he can't talk about, but just try. And this was 2.5 years ago. So it is funny that it came full circle now.
Well, I'm glad it did. And again, I appreciate the fact that you made the effort to come over here and spend some time. There's a lot we can chat. There's a lot we can discuss specific to not only my career, but more importantly, the outdoors and, really why we do what we do.
Absolutely.
Why this podcast even exists and why we connect ourselves to the outdoors and everything in between.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways, the outdoors has really shaped who we are.
Absolutely.
A little bit of background as far as I was born in Texas.
Okay, you took the first question out of my thing.
So,
perfect.
And I'm the 4th of 4 boys. And we have a sister who is number 5. So 5 kids in the family. We were all born in Texas, partially raised in Mexico. Both my father and grandfather were ranchers and farmers throughout Mexico. Different parts, about 80 miles south of the border. So up around the San Fernando area. So growing up in deep South Texas, as well as Mexico, Spanish is my first language. And we moved back to the States in 1978, and I had to incorporate coming back to the States and not being fluent in English. So it was kind of it's a little bit of a gradual step. And I attribute, I have a deep love towards education. My wife, who's an educator, she's a reading specialist for one of the local school districts. I have a deep appreciation for what they do because I attribute the ability for me to speak 2 languages fluently, read and write, to people like her. I went through ESL, went through English as a second language, and had to go through a summer program. At the time, they didn't offer it, during regular school sessions and regular school years.
No Duolingo.
Yeah. So, I had to go through it, learned it, figured it out. And through elementary school, into 4th grade, I was able to get a complete grasp of English. And here we are, haven't had a chance to live in several parts throughout the country because of my career. And, absolutely love it. I mean, it's a great experience. I think the outdoors has offered a lot of things of who I am today. It's kind of shaped me. Not only a lot of my friends, growing up in a household where my dad, to this day, he's 81 years old, is probably the reason why I have such an affection towards the outdoors. Not only the fishing, but the hunting aspect of it. As far as, everyone has a start. Where did you get your start?
And that's where you're taking me right now.
In the outdoors. And for me, it was very specifically my days, and I have a clear recollection of everything we did
This episode is made possible by our friends over at Gordy & Sons Outfitters, located in Houston, Texas, and employing a team of experienced outdoorsmen specializing in fly fishing, hunting, and wing shooting. Gordy & Sons is sure to prepare you for success in the outdoors. Next time you find yourself preparing for a weekend getaway or a bucket list trip, be sure to give them a visit at www.gordyandsons.com.
Early on in our childhood, and I say we just because it was so pivotal for myself and my siblings, mainly my brothers who are all older, and we spent a lot of time surf fishing.
Yeah.
So at the time, obviously, there's 5 of us, including the 4 boys and my father. So having access to a boat that can carry 5 people was not necessarily the the easiest thing to achieve. So we spent a lot of time surf fishing, and one of the things that my dad truly enjoyed to this day enjoys is running up the beach, going to South Padre and making that run, that 23-mile run, I believe it is, up
22, 23.
To the Mansfield jetties. And we would spend time fishing both on the channel side, coming out of Mansfield, and also on the surf side, and fishing the different, just the cuts in between the sandbars and learning how to read the water. That was pivotal for me in the outdoors. And hunting also was a big thing. My dad, who I have a deep appreciation for, from what he was able to teach us, because he was very conservation minded, but not necessarily in an outspoken way. It wasn't something that was spoken about back then. It was just something that he did as a result of who he was. And it was never taking over abundance. It was never shooting as many deer as you possibly could. It was only about taking what you needed and being able to feed, yourselves and possibly others, family and friends who also enjoyed having a little bit of fish fillets and some deer meat, in their freezer. And I learned that early on. But one of the things that I really appreciate that he taught us, and I have a deep sense of attachment towards to this day, is butchering. He is probably, of all people that I've ever watched skin and butcher a deer and bone it out, by far surpasses anyone I've ever watched do it to this day. He is phenomenal at it. He is something else with a knife in his hand. And I've tried to learn everything I possibly can to this day and carry out those achievements from his ability to be able to, to take an animal, not only a fish and fillet it, but more importantly, a deer, and being able to take it through the process from skinning it, gutting it, butchering it, boning it all out, and then processing the meat afterwards. And there wasn't a butcher where you would take the meat to. The butcher was my mom's table, in my mom's kitchen.
Yeah.
And they did it together. And to this day, it's something they've slowed down a little bit in their age.
For sure.
But it's something that they're both extremely good at. And I learned from that, and I've taken kind of a step towards being able to do everything that he did and just treasure that experience. Because it's one thing to shoot something, it's one thing to catch something, but can you process it all the way through? And can you do it on your own?
Yeah.
Anyone can pick it up and drag it over to the butcher. Anyone can take it to the processor, but are you able to
do the nitty gritty? Yeah, I get it.
So, but anyway, so that was, for us, that was kind of very pivotal for me specifically growing up and being able to kind of appreciate the outdoors and learn a lot about the outdoors. And then gradually through school, meeting friends, being able to have buddies who were like-minded. My parents said something early on to all of us, my dad specifically, and they still say it to this day, even though they say it in a different way, just because we're already, we're all grown men. We all have our own families. My sister has, she's been married for many years, but they tell us something, and it still rings very true. And I've repeated this many, many times throughout my, almost 53 years of being on earth, is you are who your friends are. And that's pivotal in the sense that a lot of what the people that you associate yourself to is basically who you are, in so many different ways. And I think in the outdoor aspect of it, that really holds true. I've got, I'm a people lover. I absolutely love people. I love meeting people. I love getting to know people. Probably an extrovert times 10. Just one of these things that I've always enjoyed, especially if I have something in common with them.
For sure.
You know, I've never, it's, to me, there's no strangers. It's someone I've never met. Someone I've never actually connected to, you know, whether it's someone you're crossing paths on the sidewalk when I visit the office in downtown Houston, or, you know, whether I'm traveling Africa, as we just did. We just came back from a 2-week trip in Africa. To me, it's always the ability of just being able to meet people and, you know, basically diversify your, you know, your knowledge through life.
Yeah.
By having, you know, by having friends and acquaintances and people you've met in different places. And the outdoors has brought probably some phenomenal friends, people that I can consider extended family to this day. My career has taken us several different places throughout the country. And it's interesting that a lot of who you end up associating to have very common interest. They have the interest of the outdoors.
Yeah.
You know, and you end up, you know, to this day, I've been long removed from a lot of the places that I've been assigned to, and yet we're still good friends. And a lot of those are people that hunt and fish.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Before we kind of, I do think that, you know, naming your circle is also important. Like I always have people kind of give credit where credit is due to people who, like, you know, push them further as like acquaintances or whatnot. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up, and I was thinking about this when you were mentioning the dichotomy of fishing and hunting, was when I did the conversation with Darren Jones, he kind of alluded to this like rite of passage deal where, you know, for his situation, he garnered the respect of his dad and the people that his dad fished with, because he had landed like a 26-inch trout by himself on a paddleboard on the surf side. And it was like, I did it on my own and I got it. Was there any sort of rite of passage that you went through going through the surf and the fishing side of it as well as the hunting?
That's a really good question. And yes, there is. And I can attribute probably that more so to hunting.
Okay.
In the aspect of being able to hunt on your own and not having someone, whether you were hunting off of a ground blind, whether you were hunting off of a box blind, whatever the case might have been, not having the need to have, in this case, say my father adjacent to me to tell me, hey, that's a shooter, or this is the distance to that animal, you know, and obviously trying to do everything you can to make that shot, you know, and make it. That was probably one of the most pivotal times as far as where that rite of passage existed, and it took place. And again, it was unspoken, because I think a lot of it is unspoken. It's unspoken in the sense that people don't necessarily, and I think more so now as a father, and thinking about it back then, having my dad experience it, but not speaking about it, was probably really pivotal, more so for him than it was for me at the time.
How so?
On being able to watch his youngest son take a deer, you know, ethically, being able to skin that deer, and being able to quarter that deer and basically bring it all back so we as a family can, you know, butcher it, bone it out, and do everything we need to once we get back to the house. And it was, you know, now really thinking about it, you know, kind of put it in perspective that it was something that I think was really significant for my dad to be able to watch. I think not only me, but as well as my siblings. You know, I've got, there's 4 of us. We unfortunately lost a brother to cancer at the age of 23, but my 2 older brothers, you know, they're very well rounded as far as the outdoors. And I think having my dad experience that through each one of us was probably extremely pivotal, you know, and of course I'm number 4. So you got to remember, I'm kind of coming around a little bit late. And you know, there's a 6-year spread, 5-year spread between the 4 of us. So it wasn't a significant spread. It's not like they're considerably older, but, you know, we were all involved and we all enjoyed hunting. We all enjoyed fishing. So every chance we got, obviously we were doing it. But I think for my dad, looking back at it, and I think it's, you know, now even more meaningful for him now that, you know, you get me to start kind of reflecting and looking back at those times, was for him to be able to see all of us.
Boy becoming a man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and it wasn't necessarily because of an age. It wasn't necessarily because of a size.
It was an action.
It was an action. It was something that you did, and you showed that you had a level of maturity, and being able to do something on your own. I mean, you're taking the life of an animal, let's face it, whether it's a fish or whether it's...
If you're enjoying this episode or any others and want to support the project, I would highly encourage you to check out my new book, Laguna. 288 pages with over 300 images and illustrations, containing excerpts by Eric Glass, Chuck Nizer, Tim O'Brien, Bill Gamble, Ben Paschal, Ryan Sparrow, Michaela Elliott, Rick Hartman, Jaco Lucas, John Pilmer, Corey Bauman, Brian Robinson, and myself. Available at select stores, or you can order it directly at buylagunabook.myshopify.com.
An animal, whatever you're harvesting, there's something to be said about that. And you don't take anything away from it to this day. And I think the older I get, the more I think the more connection I have to them. I still actively hunt and fish regularly. I've had a chance to hunt many places throughout the world. Already I've fished in many places, have a good buddy who's now in Alaska, and I've fished with him several times.
Yeah, put a pin in that. We're going to get there. Don't worry about
so
that.
Every chance that I get, it seems to be something that the connection towards that animal is even closer, I think, nowadays.
Yeah. I like that. Now that I feel like that was a really good question. I just wanted to make sure I got it out before I forgot it. Now run me kind of through again, like, you as an angler, right? Like you mentioned the hunting thing, then you talked a little bit about getting together with friends, like-minded individuals, and then obviously we're gonna get to the kayak stuff. I think this is preceding it though, but run me through those first couple of times, where you didn't have any guidance as an angler and you're running it with friends, the stuff that you were kind of figuring out or whatnot, or however you want.
That was wade fishing for me.
Yeah.
And growing up in deep South Texas along the Rio Grande Valley, we had access to some great fishing all up along, up and down South Padre, all the way to the Arroyo, all the way in, Mansfield, which was back in those days, was probably a fishery that had so much abundance. And I think it's still a great fishery.
It still does, but I can imagine what it looked like back then.
But it was a place where you were, and I'm not going to say guaranteed, but I mean, there was a really good chance that you were going to have and be on a lot of fish.
You're not lying though, saying guarantee. I mean, I've heard stories of some of the guys, like the old timers, where they used to go in the middle of like the Gaswell Flats area, like when you go further and further, far enough west, and you would just stand there, and it would be, oh, there comes a group of 300 redfish. Hook a couple, boom, on the stringer. Here comes again, and it was like nonstop. So I don't think you're overselling it at all.
And again, I don't fish Mansfield as often as I used to, but wade fishing Mansfield for me was really pivotal in being able to kind of get into that realm of fishing lures and, fishing, moving away from fishing a lot of bait. A lot of the surf fishing, let's face it, you're fishing with some sort of cut bait, whether it's squid, whether it's mullet, whatever the case might be. But that was really I think for me, the step into leading away from doing anything related to bait, moving into more of a light tackle, type of conventional fishing, and using a lot of soft plastics. For us, it was wade fishing. We had a couple buddies who did have some boats. I had several buddies in high school whose dads were avid outdoorsmen, and one Joe Johnson and his son Neely, who lives in San Antonio now. Just you talk about some outdoorsmen. I mean, these guys spent time every second, every minute of the day that they could spend out in the outdoors, and they were either hunting or fishing. And I had a chance to spend a lot of time doing it with them too. So I had learned a lot from a lot of different people. But for me, it was really the transition into wade fishing, where it was more the light tackle, and it was almost the adventure of finding new water. And how far were you willing to go?
What spurred that?
I consider myself a little bit of a nomad in the sense that I'm always seeking what's beyond the horizon, whether it's beyond the top of that mountain or whether it's
just past the next turn over into the next bay. Yeah,
it's what's there, what's the unknown.
Yep.
And I still, even at my age, I chase it, in a little bit of different means, obviously, but there's always been that draw to just always want to go chase what's beyond that next ridge or what's beyond that next cove. And we did it. We probably put ourselves in situations where, we went sometimes too far, but we were young, and we had the energy, we had the ability, and we did it. And in some cases, we ended up having much success. In some cases, there was no success, but it was all right. It was still an adventure. And, part of it is, to this day, it's not about the success in any outdoor situation for me, whether I'm hunting or fishing or backpacking, whatever the case is not necessarily about being able to take or to see, in the case of, I'm going to go conquer that next, that 14er up in Colorado.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's about the experience,
The immersion
as a whole. Correct.
Okay.
And even in fishing to this day, there's still a draw. And I think most outdoorsmen can probably share it we do what we do because we're always seeking something that's unknown. Yes, we're chasing redfish, but what redfish are we chasing? How big is that fish? And where exactly are we going to go chase it this time? We're going to find it in different places. And that's one of the things that wade fishing kind of offered us is it was limited to the shore, but it was how far were you willing to go along the shore?
How much effort were you willing to put in?
And there was times where we walked many miles along that King Ranch shoreline.
Yeah.
Back then, going across areas past certain places in Port Mansfield wasn't necessarily, frowned upon, as long as, you didn't leave any, any sign of your existence. And we weren't there to bother anyone or do any harm to anyone's property, obviously. And we just walked along the shoreline. There was a very established trail, and we beat well past that trail. And we did the same in Padre, fishing so many different places where we could access, take our car, only so far. And then eventually you put on waders or put out your gear and, off you went and started, which is kind of what led us into pursuing kayaks. And this is, I'm talking about.
Hey, just take it away. Keep going.
So, we talked a little bit about, over dinner is, we had, this is in 1993, myself and three buddies, dear buddies of mine at the time that we fished together, took all sorts of adventures all over the place, did a lot of fly fishing up, in and around the hill country back then when you could access a lot of the rivers that weren't necessarily as privatized as they are now. But we had this desire that we needed something to transport us a little bit further beyond our abilities where we could wade. There were certain channels. There was the ditch, obviously, the intercoastal waterway where, there's places we knew we could go and catch fish. We just didn't have a means to get there. Unless, we had that opportunity where we had a buddy who would invite us fishing or
mothership you across.
But it wasn't always for all of us, right? It wasn't, the opportunity was not always for the four of us. So we had this crazy idea. And this was in 1993 where we were willing to go buy kayaks, sit on top kayaks at the time, and use them towards basically kind of a transport vessel for us to take us certain places where we could access water that we normally would not be able to just by wade fishing. So we had this crazy idea, and we drove up to Austin, and myself.
So, we're 4.5 hour drive north to Austin first. So we're making a hike and a half.
We are. And it was the only place at the time, Andres, that had sit on top kayaks. I believe there was a store in Corpus that sold some type of kayak, but it wasn't what we were looking for. We were looking specifically for a sit on top just because of the safety aspect of it. We didn't want to have,
legs in if you fall and roll over.
And so forth. And, had to have to do Eskimo rolls if we're, so we were specifically targeting sit on top kayak. So by however, means we had the ability to do some research, we found that the Austin Kayak and Wilderness, I believe the place was called, had them. So we drove up, took a trip up to Austin and went to the store the following morning when they opened up. And sure enough, they had them. We bought at the time they were carbon fiber paddles and the kayak and the seats. And man, we were rocking and rolling. I remember I believe the gentleman was the owner of the store, and he asked us, guys, what are you doing with them? And I said, we're going to go fly fish. And he looked at us with this bizarre look, like that's not what they're designed for. And we did not, our thought process was not to fish off of them. our thought process was to use them as a transport vessel. That's it. Just to simply get us somewhere where normally we would not be able to wade. We were limited by, where we could go wade fishing. So we did. We drove up, we each bought a kayak, and man, that opened up an entire new world for us. And we had some really good times and had some phenomenal fishing experiences using those kayaks.
Any memories in particular with you and your buddies, either on a kayak or even on foot?
So there was an instance where we put, it was all four of us. And of course, eventually college kind of took over and different things and responsibilities.
I understand that.
The opportunity for all four of us to constantly be together. It was Rigo, John, and his brother Al. And we ended up fishing up in Mansfield, and we took the kayaks directly across from where the harbor is now. And we went a pretty good ways. And in this case, we were actually fly fishing. We ended up in a school of redfish. But leading up to us having a phenomenal afternoon just fly fishing for reds, they were all tailing at the time, was probably the biggest school of devil rays I have ever seen. And we were sitting in about 2 foot of water, and we could see the movement, probably 100 yards wide, a couple 100 yards deep, moving towards us. And we eventually figured out as it got closer and closer, we could see fins, but it just didn't seem like it was redfish. There was a different appearance to them. And we figured out that it was rays. They were the rays that were coming in. And we kind of pushed our way through them, and they swam right by and kept going. And within an hour is probably one of the most, as far as opportunities to catch as many redfish as I ever have on a fly rod, was that afternoon. I mean, there were so many fish coming from, it was basically targeting the biggest tail you could possibly find, because there was redfish everywhere you looked.
How far spread out were all these groups?
Man, we were all spread out probably, well apart, that we weren't anywhere near casting, into each other, whatever direction we were casting into. And it was probably 40, 50 yards apart, and every single one of us were catching fish. And it was almost to the point where you were being so selective in making sure that there was something unique about the spot. There was something unique about that tail being a little bit bigger, or at least you perceived it to be a little bit bigger than the next one. So you were very selective in what you were presenting towards. And it was it was game on. There were so many fish, and it was to the point where, I think we were all throwing either 7 or 8 weights. And I think we all had Loomis's back then, which were, probably the most, it was, easier for us to find. It was mainly Loomis and Sage as far as rods that were, that were.
So what? Yeah, in 90, was it, what year is this that you're talking about?
This would have been 93, 94.
Yeah. So like Orvis was still doing their freshwater stuff and whatnot. They hadn't really done a lot of that stuff. Okay. Yeah.
Sage, Sage was well known as well as Loomis, but I think at the time we were all using, Loomis's, and I think they were the IMXs back then. And so, using good equipment. And man, we just had a phenomenal day that is just one of those for the memory books, and every time, we don't see each other as often as we used to, obviously families and life and everything else, has gotten in the way and kind of kept us apart. But, when we do get together, there are certain things that we remember, and that's one of those days. It's one of those times that you talk about regularly, just because of the fishing was so good and it was so abundant. You almost take it for granted, thinking that it was always going to be that way.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, on the topic of remembrance, I feel like we accidentally skipped over your first time getting into fly fishing, right? We talked about the 3-month stint of practicing and stuff. I would love to kind of brush over that, and then we can go over whatever you have written down over there. If that's something that you want to do, I don't really.
Sure.
We can keep going like the way we're doing right now.
No, so that's a really good point. We kind of moved on to the kayak aspect of.
Hey, things happen.
The kind of fishing experience and growing into that. But so I always had this inclination about fly fishing, and I worked at the academy. I got it was my second job, still in high school. I ended up working at the academy in McAllen. It was the one right off of 2nd Street and Old 83, and had a chance to meet a lot of really cool people. I mean, just people from all walks of life, a lot of freshwater fishermen fishing out of Falcon, great fishery, and, a lot of saltwater fishermen, as well as a lot of hunters. And one of those people that I had a chance to meet, who was kind of my mentor into fly fishing and more importantly, fly casting. Because I like to tell people I became a fly caster before I became a fly fisher. Because, so his name is Dan Rodriguez. Dan and I met. Dan's a little bit older than I am. He had a very prestigious military background. A very well-rounded guy. He was a scout sniper in the Marine Corps. And I probably should have gotten his permission before I actually talked about Dan, but anyway, and he, had been fly fishing for quite some time. And at the time I remember, I believe it was Eric Glass and Dan that were at least the people that I knew that had any sort of association to like guiding specifically towards fly fishermen. So one of the things that Dan did, we eventually ended up going, he was extremely well-rounded as a shooter. We spent some time on the range, got to know each other, and eventually we got to talking about fly fishing. And one of the things that he said, look, if you'd like to learn, I'd be glad to teach you. So we spent about 3 months, probably at a minimum, probably a dozen times, where I would drive over to his place, and we would go across the street. There was a big park, big open field, and he would set out these hula hoops. And I took my 8-weight, and we would sit there and just fly cast. And it wasn't about, it was nothing other than, hey, we're not going fishing tomorrow, we're fly casting. And I'm going to teach you to fly cast. And it was about learning to fly cast the correct way. Now, you got to put yourself in my shoes. I'm 19, 20 years old.
Like, go.
And I want to go. And the one thing I want to do is I want to go cast this fly line at whatever I can target, mainly redfish, which is what I still chase to this day. And that wasn't Dan's plan. Dan's plan was very specific. Dan's plan was to teach me to fly cast and make me a fly caster before I became a fly fisherman. So at the time, I don't think I appreciated as much as I do now what he did for me in my ability and, my career as a fly fisherman, in being able to still to this day, to roll out, a really tight cast, specifically where, whenever you're fishing along the coast, obviously the wind's not always your friend. More often than not, the wind's blowing. Yep. And what is the one way to break through that and being able to be successful is, you got to be able to cast. And he did that for me. And I appreciate the fact that he did that even more so now. I did at the time, but not as much as I realized what he really did for me and the favor that he was doing for me in building me to become, the fly fisherman that I am today. Yeah. Love the sport. I consider myself to this day, someone who's very adequate, who can, pick up whatever size weight rod and being able to be pretty accomplished on, sending a fly rod down range. So again, that was kind of my stepping into, and then eventually he said, okay, let's go fishing.
How was that first day?
It was a little frustrating.
Oh, you got what, bug fever?
You're going from, a situation where you're casting lures, and the presentation obviously is completely different. So now my approach is completely different. Yeah. And we were fishing floating lines at the time. They, varied as far as we obviously we weren't blind casting. So we were side casting for everything we did, everything we were searching for. Whenever we put anything, down range, if we were casting towards something. So there wasn't always something to cast to. And I think that was probably one of the biggest, hurdles for me to get past was the patience aspect of it. Yeah. Exactly. And even to this day, I'm someone who's probably on the go, 100 miles an hour most of the time. And it's allowed me and forced me to kind of step back a little bit and not, the target's always not going to be there. And, obviously blind casting is not always a thing. So what do? you become very patient.
You start looking.
You start looking, exactly. Yeah. And it does, it makes you a better fisherman, just because you learn to read the water, in so many different ways. You learn to find those subtleties that oftentimes you would overlook, as a conventional fisherman. So it opened my eyes to a whole different world that existed. And it was the experience in catching my first fish was probably equivalent to catching all those, just to having a day of catching, 10, 15, 20 redfish in conventional tackle.
Sure. Monumentally speaking. Yeah, absolutely.
It is, there's a feeling about catching, a fish on a fly rod that, that 9 foot.
Just feel it. You feel it.
Yeah.
It's just hard to explain. You're so much more connected to the fish, in my opinion, anyways.
And I agree with you. And it's something that still, to me, there's never a bad day in the outdoors, certainly never a bad day fishing. And, being able to catch something when you do with a fly rod, I mean, it's just, again, it's hard to explain unless you've done it.
Yeah.
It is very rewarding.
I can remember my first redfish ever on a fly rod, but that day we hit 7. I can't tell you 2 through 7, nor can I tell you 8 through whatever number I'm on. Now, granted, some sure, tournaments sure, whatever. But for the most part, like I still remember that same fish over and over again. But it was just that first one, and after that, it's like you've broken the ice, and it sounds silly, but you're one of us now. You're one of the fly guys. Explain if that makes any sense.
I had several buddies that obviously were somewhat not understanding of, picking up that long stick and, being a fly fisherman.
Right there with you.
And to this day, and I clearly remember, I mentioned Joe Johnson, and one of the things, he was a big offshore guy, very accomplished outdoorsman, ran several offshore boats there out of South Padre and out of Port Isabel. And I remember him clearly telling me, kind of in a very jokingly, but, a little bit of a direct, kind of jab is, we called it the water frothing. You were frothing the water with that stick. But, it never turned me away. It was something that to this day, I still love pursuing. It's brought me to being able to meet just the whole kind of a different group of fishermen. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, we're kind of unique, just by the fact that we choose to, kind
of a little bit more masochistic with our fishing style.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. So, but anyway, that was, kind of, there's the progression of my experience into the outdoors, specifically into fly fishing, and then kind of growing into the fisherman of the conventional tackle, and then eventually into the fly fishing. And, the progression continued just because eventually through school, obviously career kind of changes everything. Opportunities to go aren't nearly as abundant. Your freedom is a little more, certainly a little more narrow and protected. Yep. You end up having, ended up getting married, been married now for 28 years. And, eventually with kids, obviously your responsibilities change, and you certainly don't have the freedom. So whatever opportunities you did have, and that I did have at the time to go fishing, you cherished them. So, and it wasn't, and obviously now our kids are older. My wife and I, my wife's my fishing buddy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
We spend a lot of time in the water, to this day, and any chance that we get, we'll obviously still chasing the redfish, but I find myself more so, on the top of that polling platform.
Yeah.
It's not so much with,
rite of passage
with a long stick in my hand or a conventional rod in my hand. It's more of, now I'm basically kind of playing the pseudo guide. And
I mean, technically you're fishing more than anybody else on the boat. Like you're picking the spot, you're picking the angle of attack, you're picking which fish you want, you're picking how to approach your tongue or how to reel it. Like, and if she doesn't see it, you're fully fishing. So I think it's all of the perspective.
Correct. And there's still a significant reward that comes from that.
Oh, absolutely.
And I touched on it earlier. It's not about, whether you harvest something or whether you harvest a trophy or whether you harvest a trophy trout or, the biggest oversized redfish you ever caught. And don't get me wrong. It's always fun. Makes for some great photos. Mm-hmm. Great conversation, great memories,
great lies.
Yeah, the lies are abundant, but it's the fact that just being able to be out there nowadays that is just, the older I've gotten, the more I've appreciated just the experience. And it's not necessarily about the catching or the taking of game. It's just
the succeeding or whatever. I get it. It's
being
in it.
Yep. And part of part of fishing to me is being able to experience with, different worlds as far as in the marine environment. And I've had the chance and been lucky, and from, in my career, I had an opportunity early in my career. So I work for the federal government. I won't touch on exactly what I do and who I work for very obvious reasons. I'm still employed. Been employed now for almost 28 years. But early in my career, I was a Border Patrol agent and started my career in 1997 in Brownsville, Texas. And several years into my career, the agency wanted to take a direction of running their own boat program. This is prior what it is. It's the Marine unit now, which is the Air and Marine unit that is associated as a completely different agency within CBP. So the Border Patrol sent us off to a school, and we went to a small boat school run by the military in Mississippi. And it was a several week program. It was a fantastic program. Very high speed, very fast, long hours. Mainly inshore. We did some offshore.
But inshore is a lot more different than what like Texas inshore is used to, right? We're talking like 7 to 12 feet, right? We're not talking 3 foot.
Correct.
Okay.
Completely different. And as far as their inshore is, you're right about that. So I had a chance, and there was 4 of us that eventually went through the school, and we were certified boat captains. And I spent the last 2 years of my career as a Border Patrol agent as a captain for them. So we ran boats both on the river. We ran boats in some cases, inshore in the sense along the bay system there in and around South Padre. And then in some cases we would go and either work alongside or enhance the Coast Guard, because they were kind of the primary Marine unit, chasing whatever vessel it was, whether it was shark boats going north, loaded with narcotics or shark loaded with people also. And one of the things that they did regularly back then is they would run these shark boats, basically the pangas that have become really popular now in a lot of places throughout the country for, they're just they are very, very good boats.
Very efficient.
Extremely efficient, very seaworthy. They would run these boats on the second breaker, right along the surf, and they knew,
like in the second trough or whatever.
Correct.
Okay.
So right on the surf, and they knew that we couldn't chase them. They knew that we were limited in our abilities to run, through the surf. And these guys had, obviously it's a little bit of deeper. Their bows were significantly deeper than ours were, so their boats much more seaworthy in the sense of being able to run through the surf.
Yep.
And they, back then, don't know if they still do it today. I'm sure they still do. They would run them up either right along the Mansfield Cut or into the channel itself, and then they would either go bury it, they would go drop people off, and then they would come in from the south out of Corpus to pick up the people or the drugs, whatever the case was. So it for those 2 years, we had a chance to experience a lot of really cool things, and worked some along the river itself. We ran several different size of vessels, and one of them that I spent a lot of time running an 18-foot Baymaster. Baymaster was a company. I'm not sure if they exist anymore. I don't believe they do, but they were built there somewhere down in South Texas. And we put, initially we put 150s and then 175 2-strokes on them, and an 18-foot boat with only two people on it. That thing could move. And we learned to be extremely efficient with how we can move those boats around in very tight places. And did a lot of really cool things with them. They are extremely seaworthy, and very maneuverable when it comes to really tight situations. I'll leave it at that. And being able to run those boats, and we did a lot of things. We enhanced, all the agents that were working along the border itself. If they had something that they knew was going to be happening,
like intel and shit. Yeah,
correct, coming across. So we would try to work alongside with them and enhance. whatever their operation they were going to be doing. So I spent a lot of time working at night, and I probably 70% of what we did as far as my time with the Marine unit.
Well, real quick point. One of the things I forgot to mention was the coolest thing you mentioned about the school was the night training. So if you could get in a little bit of the difficulties of that and then bring up the stuff you were doing at night or whatever you can talk about, because I think this stuff is super interesting.
So no, and I can definitely go into that. Is one of the things that we had to get certified in is, so being able to run at night and navigate at night, utilizing our night vision goggles. And obviously, we had, back then, GPS wasn't nearly what it is today. I've got a 12-inch screen sitting on my Sabine. That is just, you talk
it's
about
a TV.
That's exactly the
I have one too.
It's 4K. That stuff is, great detail. Back then, we didn't have that. We didn't have that convenience. So we ran off of night vision. And one of the things that we had to be really cognizant of is we could have absolutely zero light anywhere on the helm, anywhere on the center console of that boat. Zero. Because as you well know, with night vision, not thermal, true night vision is, any sort of artificial light really takes away from the ability, for you to focus through those night vision. And we were they were Gen 3, same military type grade technology. And, we used them obviously in a headgear. And part of the program was we had to run, it was a 17-mile course, and we had to run these boats through, it's almost like a creek. And we were full throttle. You're running 43, 50 miles an hour, depending on whether you're making a really sharp turn or you're running down a straightaway. And you can get the boat up to speed, and you had to do it strictly off of night vision. And it was a little unnerving.
I can imagine,
just because you're concentrating on both of the banks, which seem to be, a foot alongside the transom, and you're moving fast, and things are coming at you so quickly. And you always, and I remember going through the school, one of the things we hoped for was that whenever we did have to go through our the night certification, that it was high tide. Because if it was low tide, it considerably narrowed the window of how wide that channel was where you're going to be running these boats. So it was a great experience. We spent the majority of my time with the Marine unit as a boat captain for the Border Patrol was spent at night. So we ran off of night vision. You learn to run off of night vision for everything. And it was really neat just because you kind of get to see the world in a completely different way. When things happen at night, and, the border, yes, there's a lot of Hollywood that goes on to what is spoken about the border and the dangers of the border, but the border is the border. The border has a certain place of why things happen. And there's a lot of things that still occur on a regular basis, whether it's, things going south, drugs and it's drugs and people coming north. And it's still there to this day. And, we had a chance to intervene and get involved and intercept so many different things from people. And, we had a huge load of avocados, like 40 crates that we came across. Of course, we saw them doing what they were doing and thought it was going to be the biggest load that, that we had ever had, and ended up being 40 crates of, avocados. Anyway, it's just, at the time, so many different experiences, and being able to experience it was, in my law enforcement career is really pivotal in kind of shaping me who, and what I've become and where I've gotten so far into my career. So, it was a great time, so again, who would have thought that having a chance, in law enforcement would kind of give me the ability to still pursue a lot of what I enjoyed. And that's, running a boat every single day. Because for 2 years, I ran a boat 5 days a week. And it was, it sounds really lucrative. It sounds, most people hear, when I tell them and I explain what I did for 2 years, and it sounds like something that most people would jump on board and want to do. But there was times where, it's like everything else. It becomes putting the boat in, taking the boat out, having to clean the boat.
It becomes a daily grind.
Exactly. And it does. It becomes that daily grind. I enjoyed it. I chose to do it till the end of my career with the Border Patrol before I moved on to investigations. And, I enjoyed it. It taught me a lot about how to run a boat, just shallow water, deep water, rough water, running the cuts, running the surf, just so many different things. And, had a really good time doing what I did. And, I cherished the opportunity that I was given to be able to do that for 2 years, for the U.S. government. I mean, it's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed it.
Did you ever find yourself in any like sketchy or fishy or dangerous scenarios while you were working those 2 years?
I did. Yeah, several times. And one of the times that I'll talk about is we were actually, we had some information that they were going to be bringing across a load of narcotics. And it was upriver from Brownsville. This is in the river itself. So we were running one of our smaller boats, and we were idling in an area that was probably about 2 miles away from where the intelligence had kind of come through that where the drugs were eventually going to be crossed. And in the place where we were idling, the bank on the Mexican side is probably about 15 to 20 feet high. And the bank on the U.S. side is significantly lower. So
okay,
in a situation of when it comes to, I guess, the danger of
who has a higher ground,
they certainly did in that situation. You were always cognizant of that, but we weren't expecting any activity to take place. Certainly where we were miles from where we had the understanding of where this was going to be happening later. And it was going to be happening for like another 2 hours. And as we were idling through, they sent us a message. They put a couple shots right down the gunnels, and let us know, we were basically letting us know we're here. We know you're there. And just, they sent us a message and we took the message. So it was, again, you don't expect it just because there was 2 of us on the boat. I was running the boat that day at night, and this was 3:00 in the morning. We're just, basically just idling through, and, they sent us a very resounding message. And that feeling of, being on the receiving end of that and knowing that things could have been differently if they chose to do it differently, they very much could have. Never saw where they came from. They obviously had the higher ground, and it was extremely thick on the Mexican side, of the river. So, they had plenty of cover, and, they had to cover up darkness as well to their benefit. So, they sent us a message, and we received the message, and we cleared out. We left the area pretty quickly. And then eventually, they came around from the U.S. side and lit up the whole area. And then at some point, I think about an hour later, they brought in a helicopter and, kind of lit up the whole Mexican side.
But you sent a message back or whatever, no big deal.
But yeah, I mean, it was, and that was, it wasn't a regular occurrence, but, they would let us know every once in a while that they were there. They would just send us a message. And again, it was one of those situations where you still realize to this day that if they had chosen to do anything differently,
drastic,
they easily could have. Just because, again, we're in a vessel that is, making some sort of sound, even though the cowling was insulated a little bit more. It's still a 2-stroke engine, right? You're still breaking water. You're still pushing water. You're still making the sound.
And water's still going to refract sound too.
Correct. And there is, in most of these places, there was no sound of anything else other than basically just the outdoors. So the sound of an engine, the sound of a boat, was pretty apparent, and you could hear it from a long ways away. So
you don't think there's any safety in knowing or feeling that's okay? There also is technically a chain of commands going on where it's like, don't mess up with like U.S. customs, because then you're bringing down the heat on whatever cartel, whatever gang that they were representing.
100%. It's and we could go on for days about this, but never take away the realization and the fact that the drug business is a business.
Absolutely.
It's, we might not agree with it, but it's a business, and it is a extremely lucrative business, more so than what most people realize. And like in most things, there are certain things that are bad for your business. And one of those things is harming, like in say in those cases, if they chose to harm one of us, whether it was through injure us or whether it was, something worse.
I mean, yeah,
because they
narcos right there. Yeah.
Exactly. They easily could have, but there's always been the realization that any sort of situation that if they were to harm, even to this day, if they were to harm any law enforcement officer, specifically a federal law enforcement officer, in this case, ourselves being Border Patrol, was really bad for business. And one of the instances that is probably the most telling is when, the DEA agent, Kike Camarena, when he got kidnapped in Mexico City. It was in Mexico, and obviously there was a situation there where, Reagan chose to shut the border down for a period of time, in the sense of just, he didn't shut it down by not allowing, basically commerce to go back and forth. They just put they were putting so much attention on every single vehicle that was coming north that the lines of people in cars waiting to come across became so long as a result of the attention to detail that they were taking in every single vehicle that was coming across. So again, they've known that it's bad for business. And if it wasn't for that, I think there'd be a lot more unfortunate situations.
I hope I don't come off naive saying this, but where does the leniency come from then? Like, you get that moment with Reagan shutting down the border. Where does the leniency then come from again, to where it becomes more open, less secure, and start funneling? Like what I'm saying is, what spurs the U.S. government to be like, okay, fine, we'll take security off, we'll loosen it up? Is my question.
As an agent, say, as boots on the ground, so to speak, for us. There's every administration has agendas.
Well, yes.
Right, wrong, or indifferent, right? It is what it is. It's politics. It's happened then, it happens today. And there was never a time that I could say that the agency at the time, and this is me specifically working along the border, where we were not necessarily, I guess the operational need and on how we did things, or the operational view on how the agency wanted to do things, was sometimes a little skewed. That, they had certain ways of, hey, we're going to control the border by having stagnant activity. Basically, as you go park your vehicle at a certain area that is very well known for crossings, and you park yourself there for an extended period of time in hoping to eliminate that crossing. But what they do is they go elsewhere, obviously. Yeah. So to answer your question is it's not, it has never been something that I've ever certainly have seen and been involved in so many different, directions as far as federal law enforcement, even into what I do today. But, where the government does not say, we're going to basically take pressure off of and not focus on certain things, or not focus on drugs specifically. What ends up happening is, where the emphasis, for example, and we can go on to modern time today, the emphasis has been on immigration, right? Again, extremely controversial. We're certainly not going to get into it, but
yeah.
The focus oftentimes becomes, hey, we're gonna make sure that people aren't coming across.
Yeah.
But then, does that open the door and the gates to certain things
slipping through?
Correct. And it happens. It happens a lot. So there's never, again, there's such a big, I think there's such a big agenda that oftentimes does not directly impact what happens necessarily by making the border a little more porous. I think indirectly it does.
Gotcha.
Where it's not necessarily dedicated to allow that to happen, because I've never seen that. But I think indirectly by certain roles in certain directions that
spreading the force too thin in some instances. I see where you're going from.
You get, there's been a reduction of manpower. There's been a significant number of retirements There's been areas where people get, they get detailed to go work certain areas of the border that have a larger need. So obviously now you're making the area that you patrol, whether it's those 26 miles of river dedicated to one station, that are a little more porous. So, and I think indirectly, you're obviously affecting what's going to happen in that area because, as we spoke about earlier, it's a business. In anything business related, they're good at what they do.
Supply and demand.
And they have the means to find the areas that are the most porous. They have the means to find the areas that are more, a little more susceptible to, them being successful in what they do. And they do it very well, and now there's even a larger, obviously a larger presence of the people that are doing this sort of thing. It used to be, a very controlled environment. And then eventually kind of led into a lot of the violence, 14, 16 years ago that really started and kind of changed changed the view on a lot of things is how the violence was occurring between the cartels themselves. It's a never ending, it's a never ending venture.
I get it. Yeah.
It's a business.
Yep.
And a business will never end, especially when there's so much of a need for it, unfortunately. So, but
no, I see exactly where you're coming from. So we've just crossed the hour. I feel like we can definitely, move over to a different topic because we've focused on two topics pretty consistently. Do you want to run me what's on your phone, or do you want to talk a little bit about the elk hunting? Where do you want to take it?
Oh, geez, there's so many different things we can, and there's something else that as far as, and I think we'll stay on topic specific to boats and marine, kind of, my marine background.
I forgot the Alaska thing.
Yeah.
My bad.
So, talk about a really cool story is, and again, we go back to friendships, right? And friendships you establish and the connection you have through the outdoors. A dear friend of mine, Jim Haskamp, who runs Ketchimak Charters in Homer, Alaska now, him and I worked, this was earlier in my career, we worked together doing a lot of different things. I was assigned to a different part of the country at the time. And we worked together for 6 years. When we baptized their only child, and, him and his wife, Denise, they're dear people to us. They're basically family now, they're extended family. And I remember him prior to retirement. He's since retired from the feds. He made a comment to me. He says, Marco, he says, when I retire, I'm going to go run and establish my own charter boat business in Homer, and I'm going to go fish for halibut. And I remember turning around at my desk and I said,
yeah, right.
Jim, you're out of your mind. What are you thinking? And of course, knowing Jim, I knew there was some level of, he's going to pursue it. So several years later, I'm already working somewhere else, different part of the country. And I get a call from Jim, and he says, hey, man, I'm going to be in Seattle in a couple days. He says, I'm flying over to go look at a 42-foot Egg Harbor sport fisher. And I'm thinking about buying it, but I need to run it to Homer, Alaska. And I need you to go with me. It's a big ask. But without thinking too much about it, I said, absolutely.
Yeah.
When do you want to do this? And I think this was probably around November, December. And he says, I want to do it in April or May. So I said, okay. I said, let me, keep me posted. Let me know. There was still a little bit of doubt on my end. That
is he actually going to do it?
Is he actually going to do it? Either that or just go buy a boat up in Homer.
Right.
And you don't have either the expense of, putting it on a barge and transporting it all the way up, which was, I think, $5,000 or $7,000 at the time, or buying a boat that's big enough and adequate enough that you can run it, all the way 1,700 miles it would take from Seattle to Homer. So anyway, he sure enough, man, knowing Jim, he calls me and he says, I'm here. He says, we're going to buy it. And I'm like, okay, man, let's go. I mean, let's plan it. So sure enough, he set some dates. And I told Mama and said, hey, we're going to, she kind of looked at me like, what are you doing? And where are you going? And how far are you going to be going? So, and, we mapped it out, and him and I had many conversations prior to this, prior to me flying to Seattle and making this trip happen. And he says, hey man, it's going to be about probably every bit of 2 weeks. Plan to run about 90 to 100 miles a day. He says, and, my dad will be with me the first part of the trip and then eventually my wife might come in. And by this time, we're kind of in a planning stage of where we're going to be during every part of this
Logistics.
1,700 mile journey. And I had two buddies of mine who work for a different agency. I won't name the agency. And, they were brave enough to step up and to join the party, basically join the adventure. And they were willing to fly to Juneau. And we were going to, at that point, there was the stage of the trip where his wife and his father were going to get off the boat. And then the point was for them to join us and, basically be a larger crew. So we did. I ended up flying I flew to Seattle. I believe it's called Whidbey Island. We picked up the boat. I flew in, I believe it was on a Saturday, and Saturday afternoon, we picked up some groceries, picked up some last minute things, had a couple of extra parts he wanted to get, picked up I think a case full of Copenhagen. He's a big Copenhagen guy. And the very next day we woke up, man, untied, and off we go.
We loaded a lower lip and we went off to
and we took off, the three of us, Jim, his father, Fred, and I. And we took off on probably one of the coolest adventures I've ever been in my life. And I've been in some really cool places and been in some really cool experiences. But, who would have thought that I would have had a chance to run, and be part of this journey to take a 42-foot boat. So, we ran it through the Canadian Inside Passage. We had to go through, customs, the Canadian customs, and get cleared. And obviously there was limitations as what you could carry. And every single night, as we talked about earlier, is, we were anchored. For the exception of the 17 days that I spent on the boat, only one night were we docked anywhere, because we were waiting for Canadian customs, as well as we were going to resupply. And I don't remember the name of it was a small coastal town in Canada. And so we docked there, and then every other night we would find these little back bays off the main channel. And this is, these are the channels where the cruises run, the channels where the ferry that goes back and forth between different parts of Alaska and, all the way through into Canada and all the way down to Seattle. They travel these routes. But of course, we're doing this it was late April into May. So the traffic wasn't really significant. It was actually pretty slow at the time, which made it even better, because you didn't see a lot of boat traffic.
Is that on purpose? Is that like one of the things y'all were like working on in terms of logistics?
No, I think really the real reason why the timing of it happened like it did is Jim wanted to get down there and basically get working. He's spending all this money.
Okay.
Him and his wife made this big financial commitment to buy this boat, and taking on this huge commitment to run the boat all the way up there. And I think his ultimate goal was let's get there early. Season starts around late May, June, and hopefully I can start making some money and get this business up and running. So I think that was really the main reason why it happened when it did. So every single night was probably, it was so unique in the sense that we figured out really quickly how to catch some of these fish. Is we would run into these back bays off the main channel. We would anchor in 60, 80 foot of water, and we would bottom fish.
Yeah.
And catch rockfish, just so many different species of fish. And normally we would just fish long enough to catch one that would feed, the three of us or the four of us, whatever it was, whoever was on the boat at the time. And at that point you were done. Then we would, we'd make the fish, and whether we were grilling it, whether we were frying it, had a really nice galley. So, had obviously all the conveniences of a full kitchen. Had an absolute blast. So we get to Juneau, and by this time his wife had flown in and met us in Ketchikan. She jumped on board and spent 3 or 4 days on the boat until we got to Juneau. At that point, his wife and his father were going to get off, and then my two buddies that were flying in, of course. And sure enough, they were committed. They flew in and they joined the adventure. So we had I believe it was about a 40 to 50 mile run from Juneau before you get into open water.
Yeah.
And once we were in open water, we knew we had about a 680 mile run across the Gulf of Alaska. And, as anyone knows, the Gulf of Alaska can be really unforgiving. I mean, it's
See, I didn't know this until we talked about it. And I know I've had people mention about it before, but never by name saying in the Gulf. I've seen videos, I didn't know where it was.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
But it's a very unforgiving place. And so, they fly in to Juneau. We actually, we picked them up. And when you make the run right before you get into basically leaving, protected water where you have islands, at least somewhere nearby, there's a place called Elfin Cove, Alaska. And it's a tiny, obviously you can only get there by float plane or by boat. But they did have a place where you could dock and you can actually fuel. There was a fuel station there that the Alaskan government had put up many years ago. So the plan was to get to Elfin Cove, fuel up, and we were off. We were going to, make that open water run. And it was going to take us at least 3 days. We were only running about 8 to 10 knots at the time, just trying to conserve as much fuel as we possibly could. So we did what we needed to do. We topped off both tanks and off we go. And, we leave the comfort of protected water and off we go into the Gulf of Alaska. And probably, one of the most, as far as my marine experience and being anywhere around water, it humbled you in the sense of how rough that water was. We thought the weather window was telling us that we were going to have a little bit of a wind coming in. We had the tide pushing the opposite direction. So, we were going to have some rough water leaving, the areas of protected water. And then what we perceived to be probably, at least for a couple of hours, we were going to have some relatively rough seas. And then we had about a 2 to 3 day window that was supposed to clear up and give us a chance to run, in relatively calmer waters. So the realization was it wasn't nearly as calm as what we expected when we first left. We had some swells that were rolling in and they were really tight and they were coming in. That 42-foot boat felt like it was 4 feet. There were some big rollers coming in. We took turns where, at the time there's now 4 of us. So we worked in 12-hour shifts, and my shift along with one of my buddies was we worked from 8 PM to 8 AM. And then Jim, the boat owner, would run from 8 AM to 8 PM. So we kind of worked just so, we could share the responsibilities of running the boat. And at this point, it was my turn. It's Marco's turn to be running the boat. And, pretty comfortable in relatively open water, but not this rough of water. It was that window between, coming down on one side and then that bow almost bearing on the other side was happening so quick. We weren't but about 13 miles out, and Jim comes up and mentioned to me, he says, "Man, it's getting worse." And I said, "It's turning really quick. It's not going to get any better." Certainly not that we can see, because at this point you're basically just running and having to control that bow and, powering off any chance you got so you don't bury that bow on that next roller that's coming in. So we decided, turn the boat around, go back into the protected wall, the areas around Elfin Cove. And we were glad we did. The weather got worse. That night there was a huge snowstorm. So I've actually spent, uniquely enough, I've spent time on the boat with, a foot of snow coming in. And there was a ton of snow that came in that night. So the weather actually had gotten much worse. And we were very thankful that we decided to turn that boat around and come back into that protected water. So we anchored. We ended up spending 2.5 days waiting for the window. And we were lucky enough that we ran the boat into the fuel dock there at Elfin Cove. And the gentleman, there was only 5 people that lived on this island. Wow. And one of them, he was kind of like the dock master, if you will. He ran the fuel dock, and he was nice enough to allow Jim and one of the other guys to go to his sailboat. He had a steel hull sailboat that I think he sailed out of Japan, and he gave him access to Wi-Fi because we had no service. We had two sat phones, but obviously we didn't have service to be able to get an idea of what the weather was going to be doing. So we ended up realizing that, we were going to have to be parked there for a while, at least, back around. We ended up anchored for almost 2 days, if I remember correctly. And we realized that we were going to get the weather window, and we ended up meeting with a guy at one point during the day. On the second day, we ran back to the fuel dock. We docked, and we ended up visiting with a guy who was a commercial crab fisherman, and it was him and his wife, and they were running their boat up to Homer as well too. And we got to talking to him, kind of figuring out what his plan was, and he was going to, again, he kind of had a very, very similar forecast. Was he's going to get this weather window and you got to go. So, our plan was to wake up about 4 a.m. that night and get going. And we realized when we passed that fuel dock, he had left really early in the morning. Just, he's a commercial fisherman. These guys are out all the time.
Yeah.
So we did. We took off. Luckily, it worked out. Planning at this, by this time around, we figured it out. So we ran the full. Didn't quite make it to Homer. That 2.5 day delay kept us from reaching Homer. We made it to Seward, Alaska. Just because by this point, we'd been on the boat. I had been on the boat 17 days. I need to get back to work. I need to get back home.
Yeah.
I think Mama's patient, but she's only patient enough. So, it was an experience, and he has since told me that he would like to buy another boat just because of the expense of spending, whatever it is that it takes to buy a boat up in Alaska is considerably more than anything you would buy down in the lower 48. So, he's given it some thought about buying another boat and doing it again. And I said, sign me up. Let's do it.
One of the things you said that I feel like I want you to mention is the fact that, like, in order to be okay in a scenario where you are dealing with, and I would also like for you to try to explain the magnitude of 17, 18-foot swells, but one of the things you had to be okay with in order to, like, captain the boat properly was being okay with no matter where your fate went in that moment. Like, no matter what happens, just be okay with it. You got to accept it.
Yes. And there was a reality, and to touch on that is there was a part of that trip, and it happened right around then. Up until then, we had been in relatively, inshore waters for the most part, in some, really huge bays. In some cases, we ran out into the Gulf, but only for a few miles. And then eventually we went back into protected water. So we were never in true open water per se, up until that portion of the trip. There was no other way. You're leaving the comforts of any sort of protection, and, you're going to be in the open water. And so it's part of the trip. The water was 39 degrees. So the realization that, we're so far from Juneau, which is the nearest Coast Guard station, and we were going to be, traveling 685 miles across the Gulf of Alaska. There wasn't a lot of boat traffic. Obviously, the cruises don't run that time of the year. You had to become really comfortable with your fate. And I say that, not that the expectation was that something was going to happen, but if something did happen, there was no one there to rescue you. It was going to be basically, the rescue operation was done. It was going to be a recovery if you were lucky. And we talked about that. We addressed it, and it was real because the water's 39 degrees. We didn't have the Gumby suits. We didn't have the suits are obviously offer you that extra protection. So if you did go in, your time was really limited, probably to several minutes. Having an experience in the marine environment. I was a lifeguard when I was in high school. Very comfortable in the water.
Yeah.
But there's only so much comfort that 39 degree water will bring in the middle of the Gulf. And the realization was that if something was to happen, we're on our own. There was no one there, and we ran strictly off of radar. We would obviously turn the autopilot on and let the boat run itself for the most part. But, we're monitoring everything that's happening. And running off of radar, if anyone's ever done it for any great length of time, you're basically looking at a screen, but it's so dark, especially in the middle of this, middle of the Gulf of Alaska. As you can only imagine, there are no planes overhead. There is no sound of any existence besides the humming of those diesel engines, running through the quietness of darkness. And on the second night, it's about 4:00 in the morning, still pitch dark. My buddy was asleep just in front of the helm. And, I was sitting back in the captain's chair monitoring the screen. And I looked over to my right, which at this point would have been kind of towards the northeast. And I see something bizarre there was a light that just didn't seem right. Excuse me, enough so that it made me, leave the chair. And I leaned over, I opened up undid the zipper, and kind of glanced over where I had nothing between, what I was looking at. And it was the Northern Lights.
Oh, no kidding.
Had a chance to see the Northern Lights from the middle of the Gulf of Alaska. And of course, I wouldn't even imagine what the distance was, but there was obviously off towards the horizon, but it was very distinct. They were there for about 20, 30 minutes. And it was, I've had a chance to see them twice. And that was the very first time that I've seen the Northern Lights, and to have the opportunity to see them from the Gulf of Alaska was so cool. It was just, it's hard to explain what you're seeing. It's like dancing lights that happen, way off in the distance.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
I wanted to wake everyone up on the boat just to come see them, but everyone was always tired. We were having some really long days.
I don't want to see no lights. I want to go back to sleep.
Yeah, exactly. But it was again, that entire trip culminated by, seeing the Northern Lights, making it all the way to Seward. And I remember getting, we finally made it to Seward. He calls into the dock master, and we got a slip where we could go put the boat. We did. We docked, tied everything off, secured the boat. One of the things we wanted was a meal. We wanted to go get the equivalent of a home cooked meal, So, and it was later in the evening, and I remember the only place that was open was a little local bar that we needed to walk about 1.5 miles there to the center of Seward. And we asked them, one of the first things we asked, besides grabbing a cold beer, was, "You guys have any food?" And the young lady that was behind the bar, she says, the kitchen is closed. She says, "But if you're really hungry," I think by this point we'd explained what we had just done. Yes. And she says, "We've got some chowder, some clam chowder that I could go back and probably heat up for you guys." And I think we convinced her with a $20 bill that, to do that for us. It was the best clam chowder I've ever had in my life.
Really?
With a cold beer, man, I think we each had 2 or 3 bowls. I think we ate every single, package of crackers that they had sitting anywhere in any of those tables within the bar. It was a great time. It just, the experience in itself, to be able to, now, talk about it, and having experienced what we did was just so, it was so neat. And again, so much so that, it takes a little bit of, I think there's a little bit of crazy, a little bit of, there's doubt that goes into any of those trips.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he was to call me tonight and ask me to be there tomorrow, I'd be there.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Well, where do you want to take this? We're at hour 23, typically, hour 30, hour 45. Sometimes I'll cross 2 hours. I don't know how much more time we got. I can stay for as long as I need, but it's totally up to you. I want to definitely cover whatever you have written down.
Man, you tell me. There's so many weekends. I know, Brian had kind of mentioned a couple of things. And we've talked a lot about fishing. We talked about kind of the marine environment and my time in and around water. One of my passions to this day is hunting the mountains. I love to hunt the mountains, and I gained that perspective and that love for, the Mountain West is having spent some time living out west because of, I had an opportunity to go work in absolutely beautiful area, lived up in the mountains for 6 years, which is where I met Jim. And I learned a lot of it from Jim, and he's originally from Montana. has been in and around hunting the mountains his entire life, and an extremely accomplished outdoorsman as a whole. But as a hunter, specifically someone who hunts the mountains, he is very, very accomplished. So I learned a lot from him. Learned a lot from a lot of buddies that I've met, and that again, it's kind of that nomadic, adventurous type mindset that draws you to that next peak, that draws you to the next creek, that draws you, around the next saddle. And I still have that. I don't necessarily do a lot of hunting. I've had a chance to be in Africa 2 years in a row. Actually kind of be taking on a business venture with it's Osprey Safaris in Namibia, and it's run by a buddy of mine, and he's kind of expanding the program. Got some family that is running the whole operation. So I say that I've had a chance to be in some really beautiful areas to hunt in various countries throughout the world. But I've spent a lot more time more recently behind the lens, just capturing it from a different perspective. And it's not from optically speaking from a scope. It's optically speaking from a lens and from a camera lens.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I still cherish, where I still want to have the optical view of a scope rather than a camera, is the mountains. So every year we take a 7-day kind of hiatus, myself and 5 buddies. The original kind of the founding member of the group that kind of established this whole trip. We've done it now. This will be the 5th year. He's from Austin. So Joel kind of started, and he got in touch with some, guys that are mutual friends. And then I kind of became part of that group. And then I've got a good buddy of mine, Daryl Fun, who's a federal judge over in Denver. And, we've kind of established this group of guys who do a annual trek to Colorado, which is, most of us put in for tags throughout different parts of different states throughout the country. And obviously the ability to draw anything as a non-resident nowadays so limited, because everything's based on a lottery type system. So, Colorado, luckily for us, still has over-the-counter tags that you can hunt certain areas, and be able to buy a tag for a bull. And so that's what we do. We pursue it. And, we've done it now. Last year I had the opportunity on the second day of the 7-day hunt to, shoot a bull. And, it was,
Is that the one we ate today?
That's exactly what we did. Yeah. Mama made some spaghetti.
Delicious.
Yeah. So that was part of it was ground elk is what that was, mixed in with a 15% brisket. So, that hunt last year, I choose the first couple of days of every hunt to go alone.
Interesting. I
just, as much as I love people, as much as I'm an extrovert, I love visiting with people. There's a draw for me in the mountains to go and be alone, at least for a couple of days, not the entire 7 days.
Yes. But
for the first few days, I just have this draw and this pursuit of being in hunting alone. So the second day, I'm up pretty high altitude. It was around 10.8, and had a chance to shoot a 6x6. For me, any elk is a trophy, especially when you're hunting public land. And this is self-guided, so we're not. This is you're doing all this on your own. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty good ways back into the wilderness. We're about 18 miles north of Pacosa Springs, and had a chance to shoot this bull. I can tell you from the opportunities that I've had in the outdoors, there is one, and it was that bull. It was that certainly that time that I shot that animal, that it gave me there was a sense of sorrow that I've never experienced before. It's hard to explain. It was just me and the animal. Had a chance to, it was a really difficult shot from where he was. Luckily I made the shot, and, obviously it perished pretty quick. Had to climb my way up to him, and it was probably one of the most distinct moments in my outdoor career as far as a hunter and a fisherman, where I've had this deep connection to the animal. It's
But was it just over? So like, was it like you saw him once, took the shot, or was it like a cat and mouse game? Like, what caused the intimacy between you and the animal?
No, I mean, I wish there was some great story behind me chasing this bull for miles and miles. It was so fast; it happened within seconds. The realization, that there's obviously a limited size of antlers that you look for that are legal within this this draw area that we hunt, and I quickly realized, seeing how big he was, that he was a legal bull. So the decision was instinctive. It's fast. Yes. I mean, it's instant. You have to make it.
Yeah.
And there's no chance to put up sticks. There's no chance to put up some sort of, you're not supporting off anything. You're shooting offhand. I mean, you're making a very fast, instinctive, offhand
yardage
shot. I think he was at 186. So he wasn't,
still a really good shot.
Wasn't really far away. But it was kind of a very narrow window where he was standing. Yeah. So I took the shot, got to him. And then it has been something that I've thought about many, many times since. The connection was deep for me with that animal. And I think the realization of how hard it was for me to get to where we were, and the fact that, for one, the work always begins when you take something. The work's not finding them. The work's not hunting them. Yeah. The work is once you take one, because now you're packing everything out. And to me, there's a big draw that I have that takes me back every single year, is the challenge of that, because it's not easy. There is nothing easy about doing it. But I remember sitting there with, and I stood over the animal and said a prayer, just was really thankful for the opportunity that, kind of the good Lord had given me to take this animal.
Have you always said a prayer over or was it just this one in specific that affected you differently?
Over the years, I've learned, we have, myself and a good buddy of mine, he's an Episcopal priest. And he started a program. It's kind of a ministry. And Rod, who's the priest down in McAllen, he's a priest at St. John's.
When you fished with in the beginning stories, that Rod?
No, different Rod.
Oh, okay. That would have been really cool, Rod. Full circle.
So Rod is the priest for St. John's Episcopal Church down in McAllen.
Oh, yeah, I drive by that a lot.
He is, he started a ministry called Not Gracious. And that ministry is basically, it's a faith-based ministry that anything we take, specifically whether it's, in this case, deer, anything we harvest, we will take it, get it processed, and we give it to the food bank of the Rio Grande Valley.
All of it?
So all of it, every single bit of it.
Interesting.
And it's all funded by us who are a part of it. And I've learned a lot through him, is just seeing it from the perspective of, I've been very faithful. I've always been a very faithful, just very Christian oriented, have a very deep Christian foundation, through my upbringing. And with Rod and the ministry that he has kind of, extended more so, where us seeing it beyond the hunt, I think has probably made me become a lot more, kind of a lot more associated to the connection that I have, more of like on a faith-based of appreciation of taking the animal. And again, it's not that I've done it in abundance, because I haven't.
No, I can tell.
But this one there was a connection it's really difficult to explain. And again, I spent, I think I ended up finding him at like 1:30 in the afternoon. I didn't leave the mountainside. It was well after dark. It was probably like 9:30 by the time I actually was able to get him skinned out, boned out part of his front quarter, and was going to leave him basically prep for the next day where I could hike back in and pack out the rest of them. So, I had a significant amount of meat, and I had obviously the antlers in the head that I was going to pack out. So by the time that all that transpired, there was a significant period of time from me finding him, coming over him, and then eventually going through the process. That entire process was there was a deep connection towards that animal, like a deep respect that will never be forgotten. And I think a lot of it's been just through life experiences for me, but as well as the experience of just being older and having a little more wisdom, and you learn to appreciate and you view things a little bit differently now. And that was really pivotal for me. And I think part of it was because I was alone. I didn't have a chance to share it with anybody else. It was just me, the mountain, and, this beautiful animal that I had just taken. And I think there was also the realization that, hey, your work is just about to begin. Because it was. I mean, it was,
Well, yeah, you commit yourself to that animal. You kind of have to. If you don't, especially coming from where you're standing, what you're looking at, what you're thinking, like it does feel like you are disappreciating the animal if you don't give it the respect of, I'm gonna stay here as long as it takes and make sure that everything is as efficient as possible so that I can, quarter the animal respectively, so on and so forth. So I totally understand where you're coming from on that one. One of the things that I feel that is felt a lot but not noted is kind of exactly what we talked about, but it's typically like the harder it is to complete something, the more you feel this resounding like connection towards it. And it can be something as simple as, catching your first redfish, but you're by yourself and maybe you don't know, like for example, like the first redfish caught is the same as the first redfish you ever pull someone on. It's like, you don't know because it is your first time doing this and there's so much to it. Granted, obviously, to harvest an animal of that size is a little bit more different than harvesting a redfish, even from the back, right? But I think it's more so understanding and digesting all the steps that it takes to get to that point.
True.
Where it all kind of comes, you're like, whoa, like it's a sobering reality of, maybe I didn't realize how far I've come. I don't know if that's exactly what you're...
No, and yeah, you're on that path. And I think, I talked about it earlier in the podcast, was kind of building on what we were taught specifically from, my parents, but also my dad, really being the outdoorsman, was having that level of respect for everything you did and, and not take more than what you need.
Yeah.
And again, here we are almost, we're going on 10 months since I shot that bull and
still eating it.
We were enjoying it today and I still got quite a bit in the freezer. So, it's just that's the one thing that me as an outdoorsman, where I kind of cross, I go back to basically being the one who's going to be the hunter and the fisherman type, as opposed to me spending time, behind the lens of a camera or spending time, on top of a platform and, pushing, whether it's my wife around, and getting that skiff in and around wherever we are, or buddies that I fish with regularly. But, yeah, I mean, it's again, to me, the outdoors has brought such an abundance of,
life.
Life.
Of life.
And, I mean, and just joy and experiences and friends and so much that, I look, I love what I do for a living. I have a deep respect for what I do. I'm not going to retire for another couple of years, be well past 30 years before I've, kind of have this perspective of my goal to retire at a certain point in my career. And one of the things I look forward to into retirement is, like a lot of people in my career field, they want to move into some sort of world of, a second law enforcement career or something along those lines and more power to them. But I want the outdoors. I seek the outdoors. And that's one of the reasons I've kind of chosen to, I had this recent trip to South Africa and Namibia and have, chosen to, kind of venture into that business world of, doing some stuff in Africa and, kind of helping Osprey, grow a little bit. So again, it just, man, there's just so many things, and I know listening to your podcast, and I enjoy every single one of them. Everybody has something different to share.
Yeah, that's what I've noticed.
A different perspective, and you have to learn to appreciate it. Yeah. Everybody's experiences. It's not wrong, right, or indifferent. It's just, it's an appreciation that they have.
Totally.
And we all look at it through a different lens, and it's, internally for us, and a lot of it for us is externally as well. So
I don't disagree at all. With that being said, do you think we've covered everything that you've wanted to cover? We're at an hour 38. So by the time we finish, about hour 45.
We're good. There's, I think the list continues, but yeah, we've talked a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, we've covered,
I told you.
we've covered a lot of different, a couple different topics, over the course of so many different adventures. But, no, again, we've, we've covered quite a bit, and I really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
appreciate the opportunity for you letting me do this with you. And I've enjoyed my time with you. And thanks
I'm
again
glad
for joining me.
I'm glad you wanted to be a part of the project. I'm also glad that Brian threw your name in the list a long time ago. Because I mean, after a while, like, I had so many names, and I crossed one out, and there was one that kept coming up because it was like, I'll get to it. But it was like, I also knew that there was a chance that you were going to say no. So it's like, I'll say it for later. I'll say it. Let the podcast get a little bigger before he says no. But I'm glad that we
thanks,
did
Brian.
it.
Brian. Yeah, I mean, man, again, you talk about friends. Gosh, we've had some really cool adventures. We've been quail hunting in Mexico a couple of times, and we share a duck hunting lease now. It's Brian, myself, and a couple other guys. And again, it's just. It's all built around the outdoors, and the adventures we take and the people you get to meet. So yeah, and thanks, man. I wish you all the best of luck. I think you've got a really good thing going, and you've got the personality for it. You're headed down the right direction, and man, I hope it grows, and I hope it gets bigger than anything you ever expected it. So yeah, good luck to you.
It already has, man. Well, okay. So last two questions.
Yes, sir.
First one being, looking at everything that you've done in your entire career, and this is more so meant for guys or people who are fully into it. I think this is entirely different for you, but also just as important. Is there anything that you wish you would have done differently? Things that you wish you would have done sooner? Things you wish you would have done later? Typically, the word I used to use was regret. I feel like a lot of people have a negative connotation towards it. So not regret, but damn near.
0.
Nice.
Absolutely 0. As far as in the context of the outdoors and career wise. Look, and I think one of the things you quickly learn is don't look back.
Yeah.
And I say that not in a negative connotation. I say it in a perspective of, you can't change what's behind us, but you can certainly form what's here today and what's happening tomorrow, right? And for me, that's I live it every single day. Life will offer you so many different things, so many different experiences, and you got to take it. And when you find that opportunity to keep going, through, like for us, where we have this specific mindset of something we really enjoy and we really love chasing, whatever it is in the outdoors, man, you got to keep going. So no, 0, as far as I'm very appreciative. I think I've been blessed 100 times over, both through family, friends, career wise, to be here, what life experiences, there's been some rough ones, but
yeah,
keep going.
Yeah. Just got to keep on going. All right. Well, the last one is, pretending as if you're talking to, the children of the next generation. I feel like I've reiterated this question so many different times over the last 76 episodes, but the goal is, speaking to the people who want to get into the industry, or like your perception of the industry. What is a piece of advice you'd give them going into pretty much anything involving the outdoors?
Don't hold back. I say don't hold back because I was given a lot of opportunities early to go different places. For example, and I had this experience very recently where, we were in Namibia and we were at the hunting lodge, and, we're in the middle of Namibia, absolutely beautiful country. And as a teenager, I read, many books on hunting, and one of, some of the books that I deeply cherished and had actually read several times over with, books about hunting Africa and Peter Kapstick. And one of those was seeing it and picturing it through, kind of mindfully speaking, what Africa and what the perception of Africa was. And thinking about it as, as a youngster was, I'll never have that opportunity to be able to go hunt in Africa. And little did I know, I've had the opportunity to go 2 years in a row, and we're going next year again. I'm taking a group of friends, and I think there's already plans for the following year as well to do some stuff. And, again, just to experience it when you think it's not going to happen, just give it time and keep pursuing it, keep pursuing it, because just keep moving forward.
Just chip at it away little by little.
I'm sure it's probably similar to what you're doing now. To where you've gotten, and all the people you've reached out to and all the people you've had a chance to be before, it just don't hold back. That's it. Just don't hold back. There's so much hesitation that we, I think unwillingly, probably keep ourselves from pursuing certain things.
Where do you think it comes from?
Just doubt. I think in general, just hesitation, fear, the acceptance. I mean, you name it, just all around. And if you can give yourself that ability to just go and do it and don't hold back, if you get invited to go fishing in Mexico and you can do it, go. Yeah. If you get, a chance to go fishing down in, Ensenada, go, right? Give yourself that chance and go experience it. Doesn't mean that you got to go fish the fanciest boat or run the fanciest boat.
Yeah. But just get there.
Just go have fun and experience it. And it's it's some of those trips that I've had, throughout my life that, man, have been some of the most memorable, have not been with the fancies. It's been with the people that I've done it with. And what what I remember from those instances that I've had those opportunities to do things with so many different people. Yeah. It's a great time. I
totally agree. I recently just got back from a trip doing rooster fish in Baja Cabo, San Lucas. And, I kind of got the opportunity like super last minute on a pretty cheap discount because I was going to have my camera with me. And, for a while I was like, nah, I don't know if I really want to go, like, whatever, fuck it. And so I did. And, the logistics, were perfectly set up. The boat situation, I wasn't fishing with the people that I thought I was going to fish. So a couple of my plans went out of the way. And I remember on the first day I was kind of a little bummed out about it. I was like, man, like it does suck that I'm going to get a random partner, but I'm going to make the most out of it. And I ended up having some of the most fun that I've had in a long time, mostly because it was my first situation where I was in a group trip, mind you, by myself, doing all these things. And at the time I was dealing with some personal stuff. So like I could go away for a little bit and walk down the beach and like think about things to myself and things that probably wouldn't have happened had I gone with a friend or had I gone with, other people that, may have been closer to me and stuff. So I think I totally agree with the whole, like if you are in the means and you have the opportunity, like you don't know if you're going to get it again.
Don't hold back. Yeah. Just keep going. Yeah. And that's, it's really cool. You shared that. I think I saw some of the photos, which were
I'll show you a little video I put together.
I did. Yeah, I did. Yeah, that's phenomenal. That's really cool. I appreciate all that. And, and you nailed it. Don't hold back. It's an experience like that. It's something that, you perceive to be, it's like, oh man, of the unknown. Sometimes the unknown is probably, some of the most, the most memorable experiences you'll ever have. It's just a matter of taking yourself there. Yeah. And being able to, to commit to it, because it's not always easy, and it's not always, no, I've got next year because I don't want to do it this year. No, don't hold back. Go do it. Yeah. Go enjoy it. You only live once.
Well, with that being said, we were hour 47, probably after I take the front part out, it'll be like an hour 42, I think hour 41. So is there anything else you wish you would have said?
No, we're good. Got it all. I appreciate that. No, we can keep talking.
I know we could. I know we could.
We've covered a lot of, I think just a lot of good quality content. Good. It's been a good time.
Hey, as long as you're proud of it. All right. Well, with that being said, we've done everything we need to do. All that there is left to do, besides hopefully fishing eventually, is just get on out of here.
Yes, sir.
Cool.
Thank you.